On Thursday, House Republicans will have their first formal hearing into the impeachment inquiry against President Biden, and this comes days before they lead us into a painful and unnecessary government shutdown in which our troops, Border Patrol agents, air traffic controllers, TSA agents, and food inspectors will no longer be paid. And it comes days after one of their major anti-Biden conspiracy theories, which fueled this impeachment inquiry in the first place, was torpedoed on live TV by one of the key witnesses. But before we unpack all that, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. Maybe check out my Patreon. I'd appreciate the support. All right, folks, there's a lot to unpack here. So as you may recall, a few weeks ago, Republican Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy announced a formal impeachment inquiry into the president, despite the fact that the majority of Americans didn't support it, and despite the fact that whatever they may want personally, House Republicans won't vote for it because they think it's politically risky. And yet, even as we barrel towards a painful government shutdown which will affect millions of Americans, House Republicans have decided they have enough time to squeeze in at least one formal hearing into this impeachment inquiry. And if you have any doubts about their priorities, I want you to hear from a far-right Republican congressman and a far-right Republican senator about where the shutdown influences the impeachment inquiry and vice versa, where their priorities are.
Yeah, but do you think it's bad timing to be going into an impeachment inquiry like this when you can't even keep the government running?
We're focused on meeting the needs of the American people. I don't think there's ever the right time or the wrong time to confront impropriety and corruption. If only I could do it on my schedule. But at this point, we have questions to ask, and members like me will continue the work that we have to do on behalf of the people we represent.
It's interesting. So one would imagine the right time to, confront impropriety is when you actually have compelling evidence of impropriety, which they don't. They have no evidence whatsoever tying President Biden to any sort of misconduct, which is why so often they refer to Hunter Biden or the Biden family as if some sort of transitive moral and legal law, implicates President Biden simply because members of his family may have engaged in some sort of unethical conduct, which there's very little evidence of that as well. But that's from a far-right Republican congressperson. Then you have a far-right Republican senator, Mike Lee, in a different chamber. This is what he has to say with respect to the impeachment inquiry and the impending shutdown.
If we see a government shutdown, does the investigation of President Biden stop? We've learned so much about what he and his family have been doing in the last decade.
Yeah, look, and those allegations are very troubling, and they need to be investigated. And I applaud Speaker McCarthy for launching this inquiry. Now, I am aware of no reason, Maria, why that inquiry could not continue, even if the government were to shut down temporarily.
So there's Mike Lee, again, a Republican in a completely different chamber. He's making the case that even if the government shuts down, the inquiry should probably still continue. That's where these deranged lunatics' priorities are, not producing material benefits for the vast majority of Americans or their own constituents, but hurting President Biden politically. That's where their priority is. It's spite. It's absolutely, spite-driven politics. Now, I also mentioned in the intro that that's one part of the context, where we are with respect to being close to a government shutdown. But there's also the fact that on the Fox Propaganda Network recently, one of the key pillars of this impeachment inquiry, if you can even call it that, is an anti-Biden conspiracy theory pertaining to Ukraine. We've discussed it at length in the past. I'll summarize it very quickly in just a moment. But this anti-Biden, conspiracy theory was imploded on the Fox Propaganda Network while Brian Kilmeade had to watch. And it just absolutely undermines what little credibility there is here. And the situation is this. So once upon a time, there was basically the equivalent of the attorney general in Ukraine, the prosecutor general, and his name was Viktor Shokin. And then Vice President Biden, under Barack Obama, helped lead the Biden administration's initiative to get Shokin fired because Shokin was perceived by activists in Ukraine, by the U.S. State Department, by the European community as being a profoundly corrupt man who was not working aggressively and vigorously to clean up corruption in Ukraine. And so then Vice President Biden helped pressure the then Ukrainian president, a guy named Poroshenko, this was before Volodymyr Zelensky was president, to fire Shokin. Now, the conspiracy theory is the only reason Biden did that was because Shokin actually wasn't corrupt and he actually was vigorously investigating and cracking down on corruption, and one of his targets was Burisma, the Ukrainian energy company for which Hunter Biden worked on the board of directors. So the Republicans are saying there's a quid pro quo. Biden interfered in Ukrainian politics to protect his son. That was the argument. And so, Brian Kilmeade on the Fox Propaganda Network interviewed Poroshenko, the former president of Ukraine, the man who actually did fire Viktor Shokin, the corrupt prosecutor in question, and he went for the gotcha. And we're going to watch this. This is a 2-minute clip, but it is a sight to behold.
I had a chance to talk to Viktor Shokin, a man who says he was friends of yours, who you asked to come back and help out during the transition after the previous regime. Here's what he said on why he was fired by you. Listen.
Poroshenko fired me at the insistence of the then Vice President Biden because I was investigating Burisma. There were no complaints whatsoever, no problems with how I was performing at my job, but because pressure was repeatedly put on President Poroshenko, that is what ended up in him firing me.
Is that why he got fired, because of the $1 billion and the former vice president, now president?
Before Poroshenko answers, again, I want to recap there. So that was Viktor Shokin on screen saying, listen, I was a good dude. I was not corrupt. I was actively working against corruption. Nobody had any complaints. The only reason Poroshenko fired me is because then Vice President Biden pressured him to do so. And then Brian Kilmeade's like, okay, is that true, former President Poroshenko?
First of all, this is the completely crazy person. This is something wrong with him. Second, there is no one single word of truth. And third, I hate the idea to make any comments and to make any intervention in the American election. We have very much enjoyed the bipartisan support, and please do not use such person like Shokin to undermine the trust between bipartisan support and Ukraine.
So just to recap there, you have the guy who actually fired Shokin saying Shokin is crazy, number one. Number two, there was no word of truth to anything Shokin just said. And number three, please don't use me or Shokin or Ukraine as a whole as a prop to interfere in a domestic political election. That's what he's saying there. And you can see the look on Brian Kilmeade's face, which is in and of itself delightful. It's hilarious. It nourishes me. His visible despair at seeing this very fragile and yet commonly touted anti-Biden conspiracy theory just crumble before his very eyes and before the eyes of his own viewers. We're going to finish out the clip, and then we'll unpack it from there.
Right. What do you mean? He's not your friend?
I don't see him maybe 4 years or something at all, and hate the idea to have him because he play very dirty game. Unfortunately.
Okay, so that is not true. He didn't get fired because of Joe Biden.
He was fired because of his own statement, and if he do not do that, next day Ukrainian parliament will fire him with that.
All right, Mr. President, thanks so much. Stay safe. Best of luck along the way in this counterinsurgency. Hope you make some big progress through the rest of the fall. Thank you.
So again, Brian Kilmeade's spare is just delightful. It really is, because you can see it in real time, just the furrowed brow and consternation. Former President Petro Poroshenko, the guy who actually fired Viktor Shokin, just absolutely torpedoed this anti-Biden conspiracy theory, which again was a major pillar of the Biden impeachment inquiry, because they have no actual evidence, again, tying President Biden or then Vice President Biden to any acts of impropriety. They are just casting a wide net. And here you have Poroshenko coming in and just completely torpedoing it, the whole thing. Viktor Shokin is crazy. Viktor Shokin is dishonest. Viktor Shokin's testimony there was absolutely untrue. And number four, please don't use us as a political prop to intervene in American elections. This is absolutely damning. There wasn't much credibility to the impeachment inquiry into President Biden in the first place, and what little is left was just vaporized on the Fox Propaganda Network in an interview that they demanded to have. They sought this interview out. So if any Fox viewer or Fox personality ever watches this, hopefully they will one day, thank you very much for publicly undermining your own political witch hunt.